show, therefore, there's an intrinsic harmony to the entire development of the soul. Now, all right, why are we doing this? We're doing this for one purpose. In bringing into existence the soul of the universe, it only had one purpose, and the purpose was so that the soul then would have as its primary function the care of all the physical world, of the universe. That's its goal, right? Its primary goal, the soul of the universe, is the care of the universe. And therefore, in order to have care for the universe, and soul then is spread throughout the entire universe, therefore, any time there is anything, or on any occasion, anything happening in any part of it, it knows it instantaneously, and therefore is capable of knowing itself and all of its relative parts in any place. Here's the analogy now. If the soul is to the universe in the same way as the soul is to man, then we can then push out all of the analogies implicit in that. If the soul is to the universe, in respect to the fact that everything then in the universe falls into the jurisdiction of its care, so too the soul then, in ensouling the body, making it animate, bringing life into it, must have as its purpose the care of the body, just as the world soul is said to have the care of all that is body, all body. Now, if it has care for the body, therefore it rules. It's a ruler. This, therefore, is a ruler. Well, if it has the care of the body, then necessarily it must have some intellect. Right? Must have some intellect. If it must care for it, therefore necessarily its concern must be directed towards the body. There must be a sympathy for its care. Therefore there must be some interest towards that activity of caring. The interest is this sympathy, a sympathy for all of its parts. Therefore, when the soul is said to be ensouled in the body, at any point where you touch the body, it immediately signals to the soul that there must be something going on. Since it takes care of the body, then soul is primarily an intellectual, must have some intellectual, primarily an intellectual function. I drove here. To drive here means I had to have a plan. I drove here because I thought it was important for me to be here. Therefore, I have a care. I'm showing care. I must command myself to do it in order to realize the goal. That's care. The soul is caring for me, caring for the body. I drove here because I thought it was important for myself to be here. Therefore, I had to have a plan. I must be able to grasp the plan. I must be able to put the plan in operation. Therefore, a soul is primarily an intellectual kind of thing. It's an intellective kind of a thing. Well, if it's an intellective kind of thing, then in its separation, it must not only have the power to separate, because that's a process, and all process presuppose some kind of power, but it also must have some intellective function. Because suppose someone were to say, it's quite possible to separate the soul from the body, but the soul is kind of dumb. It's not going to retain anything. It's not going to experience anything of any significance because it doesn't have any mind when it separates. Well, then we wouldn't consider it too significant a journey. Therefore, if there is such a thing as a separation of the soul from the body, right, then there must be some power to it. It must have some intellective sense to it. It must have some unity to it in separating. And if it separates unitarily, it may have some kind of a vehicle Right? A form, right, an organization that it must retain, because then when it comes back, then in coming back, that same intellective power returns to the body, and therefore it can still function. And we must ask whether or not that journey had any positive or a negative component to it. Well, look here. If it is possible for the soul to turn about, the example that you mentioned a moment ago, if it can turn about, and in that turning about know itself, it either knows itself as a part or it knows itself in its entirety. So if it turns about and knows itself in its entirety, that is to say, as a whole, right, at once, not sequentially. Like you dive into a pool of water, you know the water as a whole, at once, immediately. If it's that kind of experience, right, where you can turn about and know yourself, then that means if this is any kind of an object and we turn it upon itself so that it touches itself, let's say we can stretch that and touch itself, it will only touch itself at some parts of itself and never as a whole and never at once. No pretzel can touch itself at every place and every part of itself all at once and simultaneously. Therefore, no bodily thing can do that. If no bodily thing can do that, and if it is done, then whatever it is that does that must necessarily be not a physical entity. Right? It cannot be physical. And if it turns about and knows itself, not only is it not physical, but it's not merely sensation. For if it knows itself, it's not physical, right? And if it's not physical, that means it's not subject to physicality. Therefore, it's not going to be subject to change. Right? If it's not going to be subject to change, then in one sense, it's not going to perish. If it can separate itself, then it's not dependent upon the body for its existence. Therefore, it's independent. Therefore, it's independent of the body. Now, if it can know something much more and superior to what it knows when in the body, then we have to judge whether that was significant enough for the journey to take place and how it fits into our picture. So, therefore, let's try it. If there is, therefore, this turning about and knowing itself as a whole, all at once, clearly, soul is not something physical. It's not physical, right? And it therefore must be independent of the body, and it can survive the body, because that's what we mean by it. Now, if it can do that, and if it in that separating, it can recognize itself. See, if it can recognize itself as that which is doing it, then the identity of the self is equally a part of the nature of the soul. Right? If it can separate and it still retains the sense that, hey, that's me, it's me, I'm doing it, it's a separation, that's me, right? Therefore, necessarily the idea of the soul must include one's identity.